Welcome back to the archives. Here we've got the recap of the round 2 game from the October Skirmish. My opponent was Stephen Hrop, rated 1900, and he had the white pieces. This was game in 60, delay 5. He started with c4, the English, and I played c6, little system I've been trying out a bit recently. And we reached this position, which I've had several times before, and in the past, my opponents have captured or played d4. And here my opponent played the move e3. So choosing not to go into a queen's pawn type of game. And I just go ahead for my normal triangle type system. I decided not to play bishop b4 because they haven't moved the d pawn. So I'm not going to be able to actually have a pin against that knight. In this position, I played the move b6. I think this was my first strategical mistake. Not that b6 in itself is a losing move or even objectively a bad move, but it doesn't fit with everything else going on. So one of the main issues I need to be concerned about is if these pawns do exchange on d5, they might be able to get their knight to the b5 square. As a result, the move a6 is a very practical and good move here, just to prevent any knight b5 ideas in the future. One of my main ideas is to push through e5 since white has chosen not to play d4, and just take space and control over the center. If I manage to get the move e5 in, then my bishop is likely going to be able to get out on this diagonal. And so taking several moves to get it to the b7 square, not as important. So a6, probably a better move in this position. I play b6, bishop b7, and then I play e5. So after spending the time putting the bishop on this diagonal, I go ahead and open up this diagonal. Not ideal, but black's position still should be pretty good in this case. We both develop some of our rooks. My opponent moves their queen to b1 just to get out of the file that my rook is on. And here I thought for quite a while, I thought about moves like e4, d4, even c5. Thought about playing a6, rook e8, queen c7, queen e7. So lots of moves for me to consider in this position. And I took a good amount of time. After this move, I was behind on the clock by a bit. And I eventually decided on queen e7, which was not one of the better options. I think just rook e1 was the most solid. Queen e7 plays into the knight b5 ideas and the idea of my opponent getting their bishop to a3 and attacking everything along that diagonal. And by putting my queen on this square, I make all of his ideas stronger. So I play queen to e7. They exchange on d5 and play knight b5. And now I've got a problem because I have to be ready to meet this pin on my queen and rook. So I took a while on this move too, trying to figure out if there's anything else I could do, whether I wanted to try and put my bishop on b4. But in the end, I go back to b8, defending the a pawn, and play knight to c5. Unfortunately, they can't attack my pinned knight with the b pawn because that would just block their bishop. And so they do with the d pawn, but they can't take with the e pawn because I would take their bishop. So this position is certainly better for white. I have an isolated pawn, they have it blockaded, I'm still in a pin, and my pieces are a bit discoordinated, but I haven't lost any material. The game is still on. So I follow up with the move knight to g4. And the idea here was to try and set up some kind of sacrifice on the e3 square and bring my knight to e4 and get a kingside attack since white's pieces are over here on the queen side. Another more solid approach would be the move g6 to control the f5 square. So in this game, I kind of neglected to control the squares my opponent wanted to use. I didn't control b5 well, and I got a worse position. And then I proceed not to control f5 and get a worse position. I did consider g6 in this position and several others, but my concern was opening up this long dark square diagonal and weakening my king. But that would be a smaller weakness than allowing them to use the f5 square, it turns out. So g6 would be a good idea. So I played knight g4, not a bad move. They played g3, and I couldn't quite make any of the sacrifices work on the e3 square. Their king seemed like it would be nice and safe on g2, and they would be able to bring a rook over to help defend. So I gave up on the sacrifice ideas. Here again, I think g6 would be a fine move to control f5. I played the move queen f6, and at the time, I was relatively happy with this move. The problem is that it's actually very hard for me to avoid losing an exchange at this point in the game. My rooks are just about trapped. In fact, the computer says that it's even in this position with the move g6, and queen f6, white is just winning. And they found the right idea. They play queen to f5. And my knight on g4 is undefended, so I'm pretty much forced into this queen trade. And now they're threatening a fork on e7. And as I said, my rooks are basically trapped at this point. So I try and save one rook. They get a double attack on g7. I block the double attack. They bring the second knight in. Now they're attacking my knight on g4. I save that knight. They attack my rook. And in this position, there's no way for this rook to be saved without giving away the exchange on this rook. I can move it to f8, and I get forked. I can't move it to e7. I can't move it here. If I move to d8, I get forked again. The last few moves, I've definitely been taking my time trying to find a way to save my rooks, even though there wasn't. And as a result, I am in severe time pressure already. I play the move g6. They capture. I recapture. They save their knight. I play king f7. And at this point, I am under 5 minutes on my clock. So I'm down the exchange. Don't have a great position. Now I'm in time trouble also. My opponent has like half an hour left, because I spent all that time trying to save my rook unsuccessfully. And so at this point, I go ahead and push the notation sheet to the side since I'm under 5 minutes and it's game in 60, delay 5. So under 5 minutes for either player, you don't have to take notation anymore. My opponent was still taking notation, so I thought after the game, I would just take a look at their sheet, fill mine in so that I'd have a record of how the game went. I figured I was probably going to lose, down on time, down on position. So my opponent plays bishop to a3, and I'm trying not to trade pieces because I'm down in material. And so usually when I get to 5 minutes or just below, I play some relatively quick moves, and I try not to drop all the way down to 0 quickly, right? I want to make it a game. But here, I felt like I needed to use my time still, and so I dropped very quickly from like 5 minutes to like 2 minutes. And I jump my knight in, and we get this exchange of pieces where I take the e-pawn. And now I'm under 2 minutes, but I'm down the piece for the pawn. So I felt like I was getting some play. I had control of the e-file. My knight's not badly placed. My bishop isn't terrible if I can get it a little more active. Wasn't overly unhappy with this. I felt like I was moving in the right direction. So we get a couple of more moves here. It gets complicated. I'm just not worried about losing more material. I want to make things messy. Their time starts to tick down a little bit, but they're not in time pressure yet. They probably still have like 15 minutes at this point, and I'm now under 1 minute. Like I think I'm at about 30 seconds at this point. And so I tried to reconstruct the game myself. And so we get these exchanges. And we can see I still have the pawn for the piece. And we reach this position here. Now, from king to f7, which was move 25, up to bishop e5, which is move 38, so almost 15 moves. I was just going by memory. This position looks correct. The move order may not have been perfect. So if you were watching and you saw a move and you thought, well, why didn't he do this? Or why didn't his opponent do this? I may have just mixed up the move order as I was trying to reconstruct this later on. But this is basically the essence of the position that we reached. And at this point, I was down to 5 seconds on the clock. 5 seconds, 5-second delay. And so very low time, and I'm playing fast. And I tried to reconstruct what happened from this position to the next position that I knew was correct, but I couldn't figure it out exactly the move order. We were both moving pretty fast, and I didn't know how many moves it was taking to get to that next position. So I just went ahead and set up the next position I knew for you guys to see. So the next position is right here. So in this position, my opponent played rook to e7 check. So you'll see that I eventually was able to win a pawn on the queen side. So now I have 2 pawns for the piece. My opponent is under 10 minutes at this point. I still have right at 5 seconds. I'm playing on the delay from our previous position here all the way to this new position. And my opponent checks me. I step to king c6, and my opponent takes the h-pawn. And this is what I was waiting for during the game. I was trying to set this up. Take a moment. What should black do here to get back into the game? Now, if you spotted rook to a3, that was exactly the tactic I had been trying to set up for the last 5 to 10 moves. And we did it. We pinned the bishop to the king. And there's no way for him to defend the bishop. When the rook was sitting on the e file, I never wanted to play rook a3 because he would just defend it with the move rook to e3. And I'm not winning any material. After I played the pin, he visibly was frustrated, obviously. I was playing on 2 seconds at this point. I was gone down from 5 to 2, so 2 seconds, 5-second delay. And this check doesn't accomplish anything because I run up the board. One interesting try I thought he had was the move rook to h8. And then if I take the bishop, he can play rook to c8 and actually win my rook. So I have to be a little careful and move my king to the b7 square. That way, he can't guard his bishop. And then if he checks me again, I can run to a6. And then it doesn't matter if he gets on the back rank because there's no longer going to be a pin. So that was kind of what I had calculated, and the reason I was down to 2 seconds was trying to make sure this worked. And it did. And so we reach this. He's flustered. He plays the move king to f4, and I take the pawn. And now 2 seconds on the clock. I'm trying to win this rook endgame. And as you can probably guess, I cannot reconstruct how this position gets to our final position. A lot of moves in between. I was low on the clock. I wasn't able to see his notation after the game. I think he probably stopped at this point also. And so I'm trying to march my pawns up the board, keeping them safe with my king, staying out of checks, and I eventually lose the d-pawn. But I lose it far enough up the board that it is still winning, and I'm able to achieve a Lucena position. That's where my king is in front of the pawn. And so our final position from the game was here. And it's black to move. Take a moment. What would you play in this position as black to win the game? Okay, so several moves win. Probably any move you pick was fine, but the idea is that you should be able to see how you're going to promote the pawn from this position. You can do that with king to a8 and push the pawn, or king to a2. King to a2 gets a little bit tricky because then you can't push the pawn yet because of the pin. I chose to move rook to c1 because that was a forcing move and I had 2 seconds on the clock. So play it fast. He moves here and I force the trade of rooks, and he's not going to be able to stop my pawn. And so at this point, it's a winning position. And unfortunately, my opponent did not resign. They knocked the pieces off the table. All right, usually I wouldn't call out an opponent like this, but just not good sportsmanship. They knocked the pieces off the table and they left the building. And while I did say this was my first time playing this opponent, I was paired against this opponent once before, and they simply didn't show up for the game, and I had to wait the hour to get my point. And unfortunately, it was the last round in the tournament, and so kind of a waste of time. So 2 for 2 on it, not great sportsmanship. Maybe just 2 bad days. I'm sure I'll end up paired against them again, so hopefully that can turn around. But yeah, I've never had someone knock the pieces off the board to end the game. I have seen some interesting resignations. I've seen people walk away tearing up their score sheets and doing all kinds of things, but we are the last game in the room, so thankfully it didn't disrupt anyone else. And I could understand his frustration. He had a great position. I was way low on time for the last 30, 40 moves, playing with 2 to 5 seconds on the clock. So it was quite the swindle, but it felt good. Got a win, another win. I was now 2 out of 2, and I knew in my next round I was going to be facing the top seed, a young national master, and the game was starting like 5 minutes after this game finished. So no time to rest, no time to prep. It was right into that game, and you guys can check out that in the next video. Thanks for watching. Good luck in your studies and your games. Hopefully you enjoyed and found some entertainment in this game. Hopefully you play better than I did in your next game. I'll see you guys next time.